the interest of the Romans in Britain began in the last half of the first century BC. In the year 55 54 BC, which means 50 years before Christianity. And this happened at the time of Julius Caesar, who was a leader of the Roman Republic at the time, and who was sent to the north of France, that is today Belgium and Holland. You need a map of England, of Britain, and the north of France. Make a photocopy from some book and have it with you in order to see where the things, the places I talk about are. The north of France and parts of Germany, parts of Holland and Belgium, in those days was called Gaul. And there was a rebellion. The people in the north of Europe were not part of the Roman Empire. Of course, the ambition of the Romans was to bring them under their domination. They would not. They would bring most of France, including Gaul, under the Roman domination. But many parts of northern Europe, places in Belgium, in Holland, in the north of Germany, in the Baltic states, and Scandinavia and England will remain outside Roman domination. England itself will be dominated, but the Romans will pull out of it, will leave at some point when the Roman Empire in the West is becoming very weak. Anyway, the interest begins in Caesar's time. So in 55 and 54 BC twice, Julius Caesar mounted 2 expeditions against Britain. Although he met with only limited success and did not establish a permanent Roman presence on the British Isles, he did establish treaty relations with many tribes and made Britain a Roman political ambition. An anti-Roman revolt in Gaul, the place I was talking about, which probably received some support from Britain, led Julius Caesar to turn his attention to Britain. The reason Julius Caesar was interested in Britain is when he came to fight the people in Gaul, he found that the people in Britain had them. So he decided to conquer Gaul and also Britain. He does that once, but he does not stay in Britain because, if you know a little bit of Roman history, Julius Caesar his ambition is to become dictator and emperor, and he obviously will not stay in England. So he went into England with an army, he conquered the south, he made treaties with the people there, and made them come under the influence of the Romans, without the Romans being there. The idea is that if we don't accept our domination, we'll come back. Because Julius Caesar had an ambition to become dictator, and he becomes dictator. And he is killed 10 years later. He manages to subdue and dominate Gaul, and then he goes back to Rome, and he is made dictator. His opponent, another general called Pompey, is defeated, and suddenly Julius Caesar is made dictator for life, something which he accepted because that was what he wanted. Unfortunately, some people in the Senate who believed in the Roman Republic thought that nobody should become dictator for life, which means there is an end to the ambition of everybody. If you put a Caesar's first expedition failed, but preparation was soon underway for a new expedition in 54 BC. Caesar sailed to Britain once more with a fleet of 800 ships, 30,000 men and 2,000 cavalry. This is just to give you an idea of the power of Rome at that time. To go. This is only one Roman army. It's like the United States of today, 6 fleets everywhere in the world. This is just one army, and it's 800 ships, which is a huge force for our time. Cavalry, like fighters, warriors on horseback. The English did not know that. They used chariots. There was a horse carrying a chariot, and the fighters standing on the chariot. One taking care of the chariot, the other trying to shoot arrows, whatever, to the enemy. So the cavalry would be a new thing for the British, and it would play a major role in the victory of the Romans. The British were able to offer effective defense under the leadership of Cassivellaunus, king of the Catiline. These, at the end of the period we saw last time, emerging kingdoms were coming, but there were many of them, and they were in conflict most of the time. And it is this state of conflict in the south, especially in the south of England, the England today, many tribes which have become powerful and which have turned into a form of kingdom. When we say kingdom in these days, it's not like they're organized. It's simply a lot of people acknowledging the leadership and the command of one person or one family. One of those was this kingdom, which was to the very south, and was in the first line of contact with the Romans when they came. The Romans won a series of battles and then pushed on towards the River Thames. The River Thames is the river on which London stands today. So it's in the east of the island, and it runs sometimes south and sometimes east. And London, when you look at London, there is a river that goes to that's the Thames. However, some British chieftains, leaders of other clans, who were afraid that Cassivellaunus might lose success against Caesar to increase his own power, also began to waver or to hesitate in their support for the campaign against the Romans. The Romans were able to achieve success fairly easily because of the divisions and the competition between the different clans in Britain itself. Some were even led to help the Romans in order to stop their opponents becoming too powerful. In fact, they did not know that the Romans were staying or going, so they were not very clear as to what to do. Is this an enemy who is invading and then who is going to retreat? In that sense, fighting it to make another kingdom, another local kingdom powerful would be a mistake. But unfortunately, the Romans will not stay this time, but they will come back. They will come back in AD under Emperor Claudius, and this time they will seek to conquer and stay, and they will stay for, as I said, about 400 years. Cassivellaunus offered peace, and Caesar readily accepted, as he had already decided not to stay in Britain, fearing that a revolt might break out in Gaul during his absence. As I said, in the end, things worked out in to the advantage of both sides. The Britons did not have the power to fight the Romans. The Romans had other troubles in Europe, in the Republic, and were not really willing to stay. In the end, this king, this particular king who was in the face of the Romans, offered peace, and Julius Caesar, having in mind to go back to Rome because there was trouble in there, and also the bigger project of Julius Caesar is to go back to Rome and become dictator, emperor, or whatever. So the peace was offered, he accepted, but the peace had conditions. He accepted British hostages and fixed a tribute to be paid by Cassivellaunus before returning to Rome. The South of England, in effect, became, in effect, a client kingdom to Rome. Now, client kingdom. Rome used this policy a lot. You know Caesar Melania in history. One was a client state of the Romans, the other a client state of the Persians. Which means between you and your real enemy, you have a kingdom which is under your control, but which takes any trouble coming from your enemy. Because in Rome would proceed sometimes by having client kingdoms and states, which means the Romans are not there, they haven't conquered the place, but they have influence, and they enormous influence. Usually client states pay tribute, they pay tax, pay money to Rome. And this is not to be evaded. Egypt, for example, has been for a long time, paid tribute to the Romans. The idea is, I know you can come and conquer us, okay? But I'm prepared to pay you so much a year not to do that. And obviously, in general politics, I will not do anything against your interests. And this is the agreement, more or less, of a powerful state with a client state of England. Caesar's adopted son and successor, Augustus, his name is actually Octavian. When he becomes the first emperor of Rome, he is named Augustus, who also became the first Roman emperor, made plans to invade Britain at least twice, in 34 BC and in 26 BC. But suspected the revolts elsewhere in the empire caused him to call off and abandon these expeditions both times. Instead, the Romans supported client kings such as Ticomus and Verga, who ruled over a Belgian kingdom in southern England. The Romans simply showed to the people in Britain of the day that they are there, that they can come for them anytime they like, and that it was better for them to be client kingdoms, i.e. acknowledge Roman presence, pay tribute to Rome in order not to be conquered. In return, Rome would help them. And this is how things would work for some time before the Romans actually decide to come and conquer England and stay in it. The Romans sometimes played the different kingdoms in England against each other by supporting one against the other. And it's a bit like the United States today. It has been Morocco against Algeria, Algeria against Morocco, and helping everybody against everybody else. The Romans maintained their influence in Britain by involving themselves in its politics. The Romans simply knew and had information about what was going on in Britain, and they then was in between those kingdoms to, the Romans basically really were interested in tax and tribute. If you paid them good tribute regularly, I think the idea is that they would not come for you because it costs a lot to conquer land. And those armies, they need a lot of money, you need men, horses, weapons, all these things cost money. And the late Republic and the early Empire, was peaceful. Late Republic had many wars which were very costly, and Rome simply wanted more and more money to be able to keep its armies and keep its power and keep its provinces under control. Conquest and resistance. As I said, Julius Caesar will try to conquer England, Britain twice. The first time he did not stay. No, they simply landed and then came back. The second time they stayed for a while. They worked their way up to London today, and then they agreed a peace treaty with the major kingdom in those days, Carolines, and then went home. Now they come back to it. The immediate pretext for the Roman invasion of Britain was the appeal by Verga. Verga is one of the kings who were client kings to Rome. In politics, this has always worked. If I want to interview in your country, I try to have somebody in your country ask for help. That will be the pretext. And this pretext has been used in history many times. How did the state of Texas become part of the United States and start the Mexican War? White settlers in Texas and other parts. At the time, Texas and Arizona and Nevada and all these states were under Mexican rule. But slowly, white settlers got in there. And after a while, they asked for the protection of the United States. This was the reason for the United States to go into war with Mexico and take Texas, Arizona, Nevada, California. Almost a third of the United States today. So this ruse, this way of doing things is very old. But the reason for the intervention or the expedition or the conquest of Britain by the Romans was a client kingdom asking for help against other kingdoms. So the immediate pretext of the Roman invasion of Britain was the appeal by Verga, the exiled king of the Archelaus, one of the kingdoms, to the Emperor Claudius to help restore it. Now this king was exiled by his enemies, i.e. sent out of Britain. So he appealed to Claudius and said, why don't you bring an army and put me back in power, and I will be a very good client, king in a client kingdom to you. Obviously, the Romans did not intend to actually have a client kingdom. This was a good pretext for him to go into Britain and conquer it and make it into a Roman province. As a result, 30,000 men embarked for England in 43 CE, that's AD. The British under Karatakis and Taxileban don't regard these names, this is just really good history in place. The idea is that the British will exist for the leaders of the capital of the kingdom in the first place, opposed the advance but were pushed back to the camp. Again, this time the Romans came in big numbers and they were able to push the British all the way to the camp. Claudius himself, the emperor, took part in this successful campaign. By around 47 CE, the Romans had secured the south of England. They then tried to push west into Wales. Now we have England here and Wales to the west. The Romans, in the end, after 3 years or so, 4 years of fighting, they were able to bring the south of England under their control, and now they start to move into Wales. Now Wales is a different place because in the south of England, the only mountains you have are in Wales. Fighting there would be difficult for the Romans. You know, the Romans had very powerful infantry. They like to fight on plains. If you hide in mountains and do what we call guerrilla war, like very quick attacks and then retreats, it becomes very difficult for the Romans. You will not defeat them, but they will not win either. And they will not have peace either. Boudica is a British queen, because at this time, we don't have English, Scottish, Welsh. Most people are born Britons or British. In the year 60 AD, the Romans faced a serious revolt that almost drove them from Britain. Boudica, the queen of the Iceni, another kingdom, revolted and marched on Comorundum, which is the Roman name for the city which is called Colchester. Colchester today is not, it's a small city, but it already existed in those days. I think it existed, I'm not sure, but I think it existed before London. So Boudica, the queen of the Iceni, revolted and marched on Colchester and razed it to the ground, destroyed it. Colchester today was a Roman power. Londinium, the London of today, and Tyrolanian, St. Albans of today, were devastated by Boudica's army's ranks. Finally, the Roman legions faced the Iceni Supper in the Midlands, and Roman victory was total. Boudica herself died soon afterwards, allegedly by poison. We tried to document the resistance of the British. The Romans did not have an easy walk into England. The rebellion of Boudica at the beginning looked like it's going to throw the Romans out of it. Unfortunately, they probably made the mistake of facing up to the Romans, to the Roman army. And the Roman army was a formidable machine because the people fighting there were trained, they had experience of war, and they were very well organized. And this is what really gave the Romans, not only in Britain, but elsewhere, this is what gave the Romans the edge in battle. The Romans then pushed north to conquer the Caledonians. In Caledonians, what is today Scotland. In the summer of 83 CE, they won a crushing victory at Mons Graupius. However, within a few years, almost all of their conquests were abandoned. The Romans were not really able to conquer the whole of Britain. In fact, in Britain, as you go from south to north, you're going hard. You have some mountains in Wales, and then you have flatlands in the south, all the way to London. Then you have the Midlands with Birmingham as in the middle. And then as you go to Liverpool and Manchester, you're rising. When you go to Scotland, two things. It's high, it's more difficult to fight, and also it's not as rich. Despite that, the Romans would try to conquer the whole thing. But their efforts in the north, despite winning many battles, simply disappeared. In the end, later on, not later on, an emperor Hadrian, called Hadrian, will build a wall along the frontier today between England and Scotland. He will build a wall from seacoast to seacoast. It's not a very long wall because England there is not very wide. It's called Hadrian's Wall. And some parts of it are still standing. It's a very wide, thick wall, high, and also with stations every 200 meters or 300 meters. And soldiers simply walk along it and stay there in order to prevent the Scottish people, the Caledonians, the Scottish people today, from attacking the camp. Now this is for history. Julius Caesar twice manages only to have treaty relations, tribute, client kingdoms, and then goes home. Later on, like 100 years later, Claudius comes back and manages to conquer England and Wales. He tries to conquer Scotland of today, but doesn't keep it, to do it. And this is where the history starts. The province of Britannia. No one did when the Romans conquered some place. They made it into a province. The Roman province has a governor, has a garrison or an army, and has a magistrate to look after the business of justice, and has another person in charge of finance. This person is very important because he will be in charge of collecting tax. Now, tax is very important. In fact, tax itself was established by the Romans, and the idea is, I spent money to conquer you, you have to pay me back. And tax was meant to stop after the people paying Rome back for the cost of conquering them. But obviously, very quickly, Roman administration, especially when it became, money is very important, has always been. When they became aware of the fact that, the money coming from these provinces is good money. It allows the emperors to do their projects, to finance their campaigns, to pay their armies. So, why stop it? And it is in this way that tax becomes permanent. Even worse, sometimes tax becomes the reason for conquest. You have a state, you want to make more money, you invade other people and impose tax on them. Even in our own history, Dawla Islamiyya, soon jizya becomes very important. And the idea is the first indication of them going out of the new religion is not paying zakat. And our Prophet said, if you pay the slightest thing to God's messenger, you will pay to it. So, tax is very important in this. In the Roman Empire, sometimes tax becomes the reason for expansion. It's still the same thing today. Countries expand when they can, like on the ground, or politically, or militarily, or economically, in order to bring in more money. The Romans, when they conquered the place, they made it into what they call the province, and the province is a unit of administration with a governor at the top, and with him, as I said, one person in charge of the magistrate, judge, and also a person in charge of collecting tax. During the 2nd and 3rd century CE, Roman Britain, Britannia, it's called, enjoyed a peaceful and largely prosperous period, and developed into a place with a complex road network, nourishing towns, and the full governmental system of the Roman province. The most important Roman official was the governor, based at Colchester, then at London. As I said, in history, Colchester is more important than London for some time, before London becomes the more important place, which developed into the capital of many English kings and queens. It is very good. He was responsible to the emperor and had authority over the civil and military administration. The governor has no power. He is a civilian official and he is a military official. If there is trouble, he is the arm, the local arm in order to deal with it. And he is also in charge of the administration of the province. The other chief official of Britannia was the procurator. This is the guy in charge of tax, who was in charge of financial affairs. Later, Britannia would be subdivided into 5 provinces. That's not really important. The idea is that the Romans tried to invade Britain once, they failed, they come back later, and they come back and they win, and they stay, and they turn Britain into the Roman province, and they bring the British, all of them together, under Roman cultural influence. You know, some of the roads that you have today in England, like the M1, motorway 1, which goes all the way from London to Scotland, is actually the same road that the Romans built anciently. Now the Romans were very, very good road builders. The Romans understood that economic prosperity is very closely linked to transportation of goods from place to place, which needs good roads. They also understood something, that if you want to conquer and keep a province, you have to provide with roads to make the movement of your soldiers quicker and easier. Which means if travel breaks out like 50 kilometers away, you don't take 2 weeks to get there because you don't have roads. And the Romans at this time, they had chariots, they had things on wheels. So they needed good roads you wouldn't be able to move on Earth also. You need some sort of road to be able to move. The presence of the Roman army in the shape of 3 legions and a roughly equivalent number of auxiliary troops played a key role in the Romanization of Britain. Romanization is talking about culture. Where you have, a legion is somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 soldiers. 3 of them is 15 to 20,000 soldiers. Auxiliary troops, 20,000. In those days, 40,000 people, 40,000 Romans is a huge difference. Because these people would bring Latin, the Roman language, they would bring, and they are in a position of power. Which means there will be an influence, a cultural influence, as well as an instrument of keeping peace or keeping domination on the British. The presence of the Roman army in the shape of 3 legions and a roughly equivalent number of auxiliary troops played a key role in the Romanization of Britain. The units shaped the local economy near the frontier as they needed grain and other supplies for the troops. When you have 20,000, 40,000 troops, soldiers, you need a lot of grain, you need weapons, you need water, you need medicines, you need everything. This in itself creates a kind of economic activity. In fact, many villages grew near garrisons. We have a garrison is a place like a Kazan, with say 2,000 or 3,000 soldiers in it. They need to be fed, they need to be washed, they need to be this and so on. So slowly, people would come next to the garrison and set up their activity, whatever it is. And slowly, around that activity grows a village. At any time, some of the villages grew into towns, into cities. The army also helped native Britons gain citizenship, as soldiers automatically acquired that privilege after 25 years of military service. Those joining the army would also have had to learn Latin, the language of command, which because it was also used by the civilian administration, became firmly established in Britain. Now the army could not stay Roman forever. In time, it begins to take British state. And the idea is that if you join the army and do 25 years of service, you become a Roman citizen. Now, Roman citizenship was very important. In this country, before fighting for independence from France, we fought a long line for citizenship. But the French refused citizenship. They gave it to the Jews in Nigeria with the decade and not to local people. And this made many people on the political scene become aware that you'll never get citizenship. It's better than to go for the other thing, which is independence. And this is how we move from this plan. In Roman times, citizenship was very important because when you are a Roman citizen, you have rights. For example, one basic right is if you have a dispute with another road or with a different person, you have the right to go to court and have your case decided by a judge. If you're not a citizen, you don't have that. The army deals with you and gives you whatever they think fit for what you did or what has been done to you. You see, only one advantage. Later on, when you are a Roman citizen, you can take part in elections. You can become elected. You can have a job in the state. If you are a citizen. If you're not, all these things are not open to you. And that's why when the Romans have conquered some place for long enough, people begin to see Roman citizenship. And in Britain, one way of having a citizenship is to serve in the army. If you serve in the army for a given period, usually 25 years, 30 years, you come out with a Roman citizenship, and that gives you a lot of freedom to do business, to move about the place, even to go to Rome, and change your life drastically. If you go to the army, you need to learn Latin, of the language. If you go into administration, you need to learn Latin. And this is how Latin slowly becomes established in English culture. English today, English we have on this page, has two sources, Anglo-Saxon and Latin. Army is Latin. Health is Anglo-Saxon. Native is Latin. Citizenship, ship is Anglo-Saxon, the ending ship. Soldiers maybe, I'm not sure. Automatically is Latin. Acquired is Latin. Privilege is Latin. In fact, the English, under the Romans, and later on, because the English will be conquered by the Romans, the French, the Roman. And the Normans spoke French, French is the Latin. With very little. Excuse me.
اكتب دير بها هيك نص. هاي دوية كاين شربت صاحبي والو شاتلك قلت لك اللي فوق قال لي على قهوة كي هذا الشعب قال لي تاني يدير فيها كبير والله انا كنت والله الناس ستيلو كل صباح يقول لي يديرها صقيلة ما فعلهاش اش يدير الكتاب باكحي
The reason English today is a mixture of Anglo-Saxon and Latin. It's probably more Latin than Anglo-Saxon is because of its Roman period and then later on a Norman period, which we see. The presence in most towns of typical Roman buildings, such as baths, basilicas, amphitheaters, shows the spread of Roman cultural religion. Towns also served as regional markets and the base of small-scale industry and craft production. There were, for example, workshops for the production of the four mosaics that adorn Roman buildings. There was some economic activity in Britain led by the Romans, and the Romans simply did what they did in every province they conquered. They tried to build their own buildings, generally big, imposing buildings, baths, public baths for people to wash themselves, amphitheaters for events, for games. The Romans loved games. They enjoyed going to places and watching them. The Romans also built a network of roads, this is very important, linking the towns and villages, which facilitated the transportation of bulky, heavy, big trade goods. Apart from tin, lead, and iron, whose mining provided some income, Britain's main exports were leather and textiles. England is good flat land with lots of grass, where you grow lots of sheep. And England, one of the elements in the English Industrial Revolution is wood and textile. In return, Britain imported luxury goods such as glass vessels, fine pottery, and garum, the fish sauce, much beloved of Roman cooks. At the top of the social scale, lavish villas, which were often surrounded by farming settlements, colonized the countryside. Rich Romans simply took the land. See, in the beginning, land in England was farm land. Rich Romans, and maybe rich Romans, simply built big houses with the land surrounding them for exploitation. It's a system which will grow later on in the feudalism, in the system of these very important castles with lots of land around them, almost working as independent units. Most people, however, continue to live in traditional roundhouses or rectangular houses. There is evidence of the persistence of traditional beliefs. Priests of the Iberian cult and devotees of exotic mystery cults, such as Isis and Mithras, could be found in towns. In terms of religion and spirituality, the English, as we saw last week, they had their own druids, living solitary lives in woods and so on. The Romans would bring them their own worshiping systems, if you wish. Some would worship the emperor, especially Augustus and his mom, despite their reputation, had people worshipping them as they lived, as in Rome. And some of that was exported to different provinces. There were also very old cults like the worship of Isis and other gods and goddesses from the east, which found their way through Roman conquest into the Roman Empire, and from there also into Britain. This is mainly in towns and cities. But in the countryside, Celtic deities were dominant. Frequently, the identities of Celtic and Roman gods merged, such as Sulis with Minerva at Aquae Sulis, but the city of Bath. There is a city in Britain called Bath. Life in Roman Britain. In the future, we keep this to the end of the session. When I say I finished, you bring it down now. But in the future, keep it till I finish. Life in Roman Britain. Roman rule in Britain spanning nearly 400 years introduced new ways of governing and an urban way of life with new architecture and religious beliefs. However, many Britons outside the urban centres continue to live in much the way they always have done. You have to realize that when we say, for example, today when we say some place was under Roman domination, it's not that every little place was. In the cities, in the big towns, yes. For example, in the capital, Roman presence would be felt. There is an army, there are officials, there are buildings, there is this and that. But the further you go away from the capital, the smaller the places, the less Roman influence you have. When you go to the country, people probably did not feel neither the presence nor the dominance of, yes, they paid tax, they had something, were hard-working people who simply worked as hard as they always did, roads or no roads. That's why you have to sort of keep in mind that when we talk about historical things, especially when we squeeze a lot of years in a short time, or, for example, when we talk about somebody conquering someplace, it's not like they conquered every square meter of the place. It's, they really, the Romans, when they conquered people, if they are given peace, they would leave things as they found them. You are head of your clan is happy with you, you pay less tax, fair enough. You live as you always live, pay less tax, do not interfere with our own plans, and you're fine. You can live for many decades as like that, as long as you don't bother. Even in religion, again, if you're worshipping your little druid in some forest there, whom you visit every month or so, and did not bother the state didn't bother you. Of course, later on, we will have systems which want to bring you inside, forcibly. But the Romans were not like that. They were happy to leave people as they were, if they accept Roman presence and domination, if they pay their taxes, if they obey Roman rules, if they do not interfere, if their religion and beliefs do not interfere with the state. At the beginning, Christians were persecuted in Rome. Christians, when they started working their own thing, it's because they were calling for a religion that is above the state. In that condition, they become troublesome for the state. If you're saying authority resides in some place higher than the government or than the ungoverned, you're in trouble. And this is why religions like Christianity at the beginning were persecuted. Christians were burned in public. Why? Because they were calling for a religion which places authority above Roman authority. Now, the Romans would never accept that. The trouble with Jesus himself in Palestine begins with this. He's preaching something that says there is another power in this world above Roman power. And the Romans will not accept. But if you have a little religion which does not have this idea of supreme power, then you're fine. You're left to do your own business. The organization of an official Roman province of Britannia affected the higher levels of British society. Some Britons became full Roman citizens and committed to a new way of life. For many people living outside the towns, however, life remained relatively unchanged after the Roman conquest. The effect of the Roman presence was to lead to split British society into two. Those who were educated or had money or had land sought and obtained Roman citizenship and lived more or less the Roman way of life in a villa with a bath and so on. The rest were simply not interested, nor was the Roman Empire interested. One aspect of Romanization that was hard to avoid was organized taxation. No, taxation existed in Britain before that. But the government would make taxation like music sounds. They would count the people, know exactly what they have, how many cows, how many pigs, how many hens, and make them pay tax on every little. The point is that in Rome, how does Rome collect tax from a province like Britannia? The Romans organized a kind of auction, reserve. People in Rome offer to collect so much tax from a province. In the Senate in Rome, they ask the question, who is ready to take charge of collecting tax in Britannia? 3 or 4 people are interested. But how do they choose the best one? The best one is the one who offers the government the most money from that province. You understand? If we are 4 of us interested, I say, I can pay you 200 million from Britannia. Somebody says 300. Another says 400. They give the contract to the guy who proposes the biggest amount of money. Now that person has to go to Britain and collect that tax and also more for himself. And this is why taxation for the Roman Empire would become very problematic. Because people in Rome, in order to win contracts, they pledge a lot of money. They promise the state a lot of money, which they have to bring each year. In order to do that, they have to tax the people very, very heavily. Sometimes people, especially in some provinces, that turn out to be poorer than expected. For example, there is a new province, Britain. Some people say it's a rich place, lots of rich people, with lots of economic activity, you can make a lot of money out of it. You come to Rome and you offer to bring 500 million from Britain. You go to Britain and you're surprised. You know, the place is poor. People can hardly subsist. And yet, you have to find that money in the state. In the end, sometimes, taxation. If in the beginning it was a reason to conquest, afterwards it becomes a reason to rebel. And most of the rebellions against the Romans started somewhere around. The rebellion of the United States, the emergent United States, against Britain started with tax. That's how important tax and behind it money are in essence. The province became subject to many kinds of tax. Poll tax on individuals, a tax on the productivity of the land, a sales tax levied on certain transactions, such as the sale of slaves, and on goods entering the province from elsewhere. There are many kinds of tax. The worst of all is tax on the individual. It's like on being an individual. Breathing air in this country, you pay tax. Because as an individual, you may have nothing, yet you have to pay tax. And then you have other taxes. Tax on land, yes, you grow things on land, you make money, you give part of it to the state. You sell things and buy things, you make a profit, you give some to the state. This is practice in this country, in every country. You bring things from abroad, you pay tax in the poor. You know, when your parents give you something, the state puts tax on it. If your parents die and leave you a house, in name it is your house, but really to write it in your name, you need to pay tax to the state, even in this country. Now this is a tax that you have to pay as a Roman citizen. If as a Roman citizen you inherited something from your parents, you have to pay tax on it. The poll tax, the tax on individuals, in particular caused upset trouble and played a part in the revolt of bullying we saw earlier. The organisation and taxation of Britain was made possible by the growth of urban centres connected by a network of roads. The well-constructed Roman roads also allowed movement of troops and supplies in the roads. You know, if people are scattered in the countryside, to no roads, it's very hard to go to each one of them and connect them. I think they come together in a city, in a village, with good roads between them. It's easy to find them and tax them. And this is exactly what happened in Britain. When the Romans built roads, they knew exactly what they were doing. They were making the movement of goods easy, movement of troops, and also the movement of people easy, including the people who travel from place to place to collect tax. Urban growth, the growth of towns and cities. The first official foundation at Cromwell, Colchester, was in 49 CE. A colonia established for legionary residents. The first establishment of a Roman city in Britain was at Colchester. And it started as a village for veterans of the army. You know, when people have served in the army in the age of 60, sometimes 50, when they leave the army, they have nothing to go back to in Rome or wherever they came from. They spent 20, 30 years in Britain. They probably married a British woman. They have kids there. So when they come out of the army, they usually stay where they work in the army. And the first settlement is this village at Colchester, built by the Roman army for the veterans. You come out of the army, you find a house, and you put a plot of land to work on and live, in addition to your pension. London, which becomes London, grew up on the north bank of the Thames, together with a major suburb on the south side of the river. Colchester was established before London, which then would become the big city we know today and become the capital of the United Kingdom. The 20 or so large towns of Roman Britain housed about 500,000 people, about 10% of the total population. Smaller settlements clustered near major roads or near Roman village restoration. See, despite what we have said about the Romanization of Britain, you realize that only 10% of the inhabitants of Britain lived in villages and towns in which you have Roman influence. 90% lived in the countryside and probably did not feel Roman influence, but probably in tax. The wealthier Romanized elite owned villas, country estates surrounded by agricultural holdings near an urban center. This will become actually one characteristic of the English countryside of the Roman times. Nice houses outside a village or city or town, with land around the house to be cultivated, usually by workers who work for the wealthy man, the owner of the house. The most elaborate examples are evidence of a fully Romanized building. These houses were built on the Roman model. When the Romans were in England, Britain, of that day, most English people, British people lived in brown houses, the ones we saw last week. But the wealthiest, who have become rich out in commerce or by they are in becoming citizens, managed to have villas on the Roman model built for them. Even villas on a more modest scale show a level of everyday luxury that had not been seen in Britain before. Underfloor heating, tiled floors. See, usually in a house the floor is dirt. The Romans were in tiles to put on the floor. Underfloor heating. The Romans, in very expensive buildings, they had central heating for this time. They run lead tubes under the house and run hot water in them. Usually hot water coming from a spring, a hot spring, rather than water being heated by fire. And by running water in these pipes under the floor is warm, and this is how the house becomes warm. And plastered and painted walls are commonly found. Again, plaster. Usually in a house, if you build a stone or mud, you have mud on the wall or stone. The Romans would bring in plaster, gypsum, which they would put on the walls. When you put plaster and you smooth it, you can draw on it, you can make your house look better by having pictures drawn on it. The towns of Roman Britain evolved over time, and types of buildings found throughout the Roman world became widespread in the province. These included public baths, temples, and buildings. Other public buildings included forums and basilicas, the judicial and administrative centers of many towns. Theatres and amphitheatres are less common than temples and baths, which were found in most urban centers. The Romans had an architecture, in fact, an area in which the Romans would advance on the Greek, or what they inherited from the Greeks, is architecture. And in this country, there are many examples of Roman architecture. It's solid, it's big, and it's also public. Roman architects were public architects, i.e., they designed buildings for use by the public. There is a bit of domestic architecture, i.e., architecture for the individual, like the house. But Roman architects and engineers, they excelled mainly in projects for the people. Roads, aqueducts, take water from one place to another place. When you see those Roman bridges, one on top of the other, it's to carry water. Because if you want water from there to there, and you have this place like this, if water comes into it, it can stay here. So the idea is to try to fill up this. And what you do is you have a little down there. So you start with one dome, and then on top of it make it flat, and it's like the big bricks you see in Constantine. And like that. Sometimes 3, 4 stories. It was later on used for railways and roads. But at the beginning, it was used for water. The Roman engineers and architects also built amphitheaters, public baths. There is a bath I'm not sure it's in Caracalla, which could house 3,000 people at the same time. It's a huge complex of rooms and basements, the pools, the hot and cold, and it's a huge complex. So, 3,000 could go in there at the same time.